Welcome to a bonus episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with this ceasefire deal. Normally, I don't post midweek, but I figured that it's not a bad idea for those who may be getting a flurry of information and don't really know what to make of it or how to feel. And I want to title this episode, Ceasefire I Win and Ceasefire You Lose. That's kind of a play on that joke when you say heads I win and tails you lose, where in the end, no matter what happens, one side loses. And I don't know if we can officially say that Israel kind of lost in this situation. I know you'll hear many people on one side saying that this is the biggest loss that Israel could have. Other people will say this is a big victory for the Israelis, and some people might be in the middle ground. And to be fair, I don't have any extra knowledge that you all don't have. I only hear from the media and negotiators and things just like you. But I do have some insights, maybe based on the past and how this has typically gone, to give us some insight into maybe what we can expect in the next month or so. So what we know so far is that a ceasefire has officially been signed. And many people are happy about that for obvious reasons. And I'll go through a few just off the top, which is the soldiers that have been fighting, and tragically some have been dying in Gaza, will now have a break and will get to go home and will not be under that stressful situation of fighting Hamas. That's a great thing. And also, we are going to get some hostages back, which is obviously amazing news. On the other hand, you have a lot of people who are against this idea for a few reasons. One, maybe it's because they've seen these ceasefires before. And let me remind you, October 6th was the last ceasefire that clearly was over on October 7th. So the question, I guess, is how long will this ceasefire go on until the next tragic event against the Israelis? Another main issue is the fact that, unfortunately, due to international pressure, the United States, many people who think it's okay to trade prisoners who are terrorists for babies and hostages, felt that apparently 33 people to be released for the equivalent of about 1,200 or more prisoners is a fair deal. We've talked about this on the podcast before. You can go listen to some of our other episodes. But this could be seen as a horrible deal. Why isn't it 1 for 1 or 2 for 1? Why is it that we aren't getting all of the hostages back at once? And I'll get into why that's important in a minute. These are valid criticisms. And another valid criticism from a military point of view is that part of the deal is Hamas has made Israel move back to allow for them to recover and to regroup. Israel's going to be forced to move out of the cities and kind of take a step back. Hamas has always asked for all of the surveillance that happens in Gaza, all of the drones that see what's going on, to have to leave. So therefore they can regroup, they can set down traps, they can do pretty much whatever they want. Not to mention they have allowed for a flood of people to head back into the north, which would allow Hamas to also go back into the north and regroup. So if this war kicks off yet again, which assuming it will based on history, all of the Israeli lives that were lost to gain the ground that we have today will be for nothing. We're going to have to go and get that again against terrorists who have had a month to put down IEDs and to kill as many Israelis trying to regain the ground that we already lost Israelis trying to get. There are very valid things on both sides. So I don't really know if this is a great thing or a horrible thing. Maybe it's unfortunately the only thing we can get right now, since the world really doesn't give a shit about the Israelis who are currently underground for over 400 days. This might be the best we can get. Now, there's one thing that's very, very important to know about this ceasefire. Technically speaking, it is not a permanent ceasefire, which means that in about a month and a half, Israel can go back to war and continue to finish what they've been doing, taking out Hamas. I'll be honest, it rarely does, because the international pressure once they've stopped fighting is to continue that moving forward. The fear we have from the past and why people are very hesitant and why it's an important thing to get all of the hostages out at once is that Hamas asks for these phases on purpose. They purposefully ask for these phases to release a drip, drip, drip of people because they know that they can just keep dripping people out, hold on to the rest of the people until they are ready to fight again, and then they will break the ceasefire the minute they are ready to fight. So give it a month or so, They know the international media loves to demonize Israel. So the minute that Hamas breaks the ceasefire and Israel can prove that Israel wasn't the one who broke the ceasefire, the world will blame Israel. Hamas can go back to fighting. They can keep those hostages and not have to release them. And this thing will go on for years if they wanted to. We've seen this before. This isn't new to us, which is why many, many people are completely against any ceasefire, because they know that ceasefire essentially just means Hamas regroups, they get to take whatever time they need, and they'll keep the hostages anyway, because the hostages are vital to their survival. It is the only reason why Hamas hasn't been completely destroyed, is because they need to get the hostages. Another very unfortunate situation, which only time will tell how this goes, is the fact that during the ceasefire negotiations, one of the sticking points that the Israelis had was that they wanted a list of who was alive and who was not. And Hamas refused to give them that information. So as of now, Hamas has decided that they are going to give the names of the people that they are willing to release in the first phase of this ceasefire deal. But the Israelis still have no idea if we're only getting back dead bodies. All of those people could be dead. Some of the people could be dead. And here we are giving back 1,200 or so live terrorists who have been convicted for possibly a bunch of dead bodies. The hypocrisy from the international world is unbelievable. And another downside to this deal, although to be honest, it really doesn't change the calculus on the ground, is the fact that we are trading our innocent civilian hostages that they stole against all international law for prisoners who committed terrorism. So what stops Hamas, or any other group for that matter, from kidnapping Israelis or Jews all over the world and negotiating for 1,000 prisoners? We have set a standard that makes it okay to do this. This specific ceasefire, of course, didn't do that. Many ceasefires before that were forced on Israel did that, which made October 7th possible. The reality of the fact that they planned on kidnapping as many people as they could only proves that this is their new method to get people out of jails, to force Israel into submission. This is their new way of working, and it's only proven to be successful. And the funniest thing in this whole situation, if you could find humor in it, and the Jews always do, is the reason why I called this podcast Ceasefire I Win and Ceasefire You Lose, because that's the way that Hamas works and the Palestinian supporters work. Somehow, their ceasefire makes them win. So you've already seen online the posts of fireworks and Hamas people cheering in the streets, handing out candies that the big bad Israelis have been put into submission, blah, 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 while at the same time literally crying that there's a genocide happening and that their entire country, if you call it that, has been destroyed. There's not livable situations for the next 20 years, they say, and yet they win? How is it that anybody in their right mind can literally say a genocide and a Holocaust is taking place, flip a switch when they sign on the dotted line for the ceasefire, and all of a sudden, 100% complete successful mission, we win, you lose? Think about it for a minute. After the Holocaust, all of these Jewish people came out of these camps. I'm sure they were quite excited about being free, but I can guarantee you there were not celebrations happening following the Holocaust. Guaranteed people were taking stock on their own lives, trying to find their families and friends, reflecting on what had happened over the last number of years. They weren't celebrating being liberated. That is the normal reaction to people who are experiencing a genocide, who are experiencing death and destruction the way that we think or are told Gaza's been dealing with it. And yet the people are celebrating? Celebration would suggest that either you didn't really care about the people on the ground, and that was all part of your strategy, which is kind of what we know, or secondly, the fact that it actually wasn't happening this entire time. They kind of outed themselves, ironically, proving that there literally wasn't a genocide, there wasn't mass starvation, there wasn't an ethnic cleansing. All of the things they've been saying for over 1 year apparently isn't happening anymore. Because apparently this was a successful victory that Hamas should be so proud of. And not surprisingly, their absolutely stupid and uneducated followers buy this stuff. Yep, there's a genocide, and also we won. Okay, which one is it? Did you win, or was there a genocide? I don't think by the end of World War II any Jewish people after the Holocaust were saying, we won the Holocaust. We won World War II. I'm pretty sure the Jewish people were like, this was a horrific act. I don't care that we survived. That's not a win. We were lucky to survive. But meanwhile, in Gaza, big celebrations all around. Because Hamas never cared about the people, never cared about the infrastructure, or any of the stuff that the Western idiots claim to care about. They only cared about Hamas winning. And winning equals staying in power and staying alive. Ironically, many of them are dead and many of them are in jail at this point. So it's not really a victory. But the fact that Israel is seen as quote unquote surrendering is all they really needed. And I created a post that I thought was pretty interesting for this situation. This was before the ceasefire was official. It'll be on our Instagram probably by the time you listen to this podcast. I call it Hamas math. So according to Hamas math, 20,000 people, Hamas members, were killed in battle. Thousands were arrested. Many, many civilians were harmed and killed by Hamas using them as human shields, but nonetheless, they are dead. The UN and many other organizations, including Hamas, like to say that Gaza has been completely leveled and is uninhabitable. All of these things were apparently, according to them, a victory to get 1,200 terrorists out. If you need to see the priorities of Hamas, is the fact that it's worth tens of thousands of people dead, mostly Hamas members, but nonetheless some civilians, the entire area uninhabitable for people, and that is a win to get 1,000 of your boys out of prison? Clearly they don't care about their own people. You shouldn't really need any other proof. In the end, honestly, I really don't know if this is a great deal, a bad deal, a mediocre deal, or just the only deal we can get right now. And at least it brings some hostages home. I don't think Israel really cares what the Arab world or the pro-Pally idiots say is a victory. I don't think we care that they're shooting off their fireworks claiming that the Zionists are gone. We're still here. We're not going anywhere. Israel's still going to be here. And Israel's probably not going to end this issue in Gaza in a month. They'll go back to fighting, I'm sure. But it's all about the propaganda and all the bullshit that Hamas has to spew in order to make itself relevant. The October 7th massacre, we'll call it, was deemed by many Palestinian Arabs and their supporters as a great success, because really all they want to do is kill Jews, so it was a success in that sense. The fight afterwards, by most standards, would be an absolute failure of Hamas. Most of their people are gone, including their leadership. Their entire area has been completely destroyed. Many of their civilians have no homes, and sadly, many people died. This is by no sense a victory, but they get to say it's a victory so they can pretend it's a victory because all they care about is themselves and being able to do this again. And one last thing I want to warn all of my listeners about, and I posted this on our Instagram recently, is that once the hostages are finally, thank God, released, and God willing they are still alive, we can expect for them to start eventually speaking about what happened to them. We already know from previous hostages that were released, the sexual assaults, the violence, the mistreatment, the absolutely horrific conditions they were kept in. We all know that, and it's going to be probably worse after 400 days. So we need to prepare ourselves for that. But what I think we need to remember, and mark my words, this will happen, as these people start talking and telling their stories and sharing with the world what happened, you can bet that Hamas PR is going to start putting out all kinds of similar stories about the supposed terrible treatment of the IDF and of the Israeli security forces in jails mistreating Palestinian Arabs. Like I've said on this podcast many times, every time we say they've done something, they will literally just spin it around and change it with no evidence whatsoever to show, look, both sides do it. You can ignore the fact that we, the big heroes, the Hamas people, mistreated women and children and babies. Ignore that because Israel does it too. So they need to flood the internet to their pro-Pally supporters to tell everyone, look how badly they treated them. So it's even. We don't need to stick with the Israeli side, the right side of this argument, because both sides are bad. Mark my words, this will happen. I promise you. Because it happened the last time Hamas let people out of Gaza, and we heard the stories, And then we heard the supposed rapes and baby killings and all of the other BS that they put out in order to try and muddy the waters of fact and truth. So I don't know if this podcast helped anybody better understand the situation. There's still so much we don't know. Some behind the scenes negotiations, who's going to do what? Is this even going to last the full 1.5 months? But what I can tell you is, God willing, we'll have our people back and they will be alive. And I pray that they get whatever help they need medically, mental health wise. But we cannot allow this to ever happen again. This war, we'll call it, is not over. Hamas is still technically around and they can no longer rule in that area. So any deal that keeps Hamas in any type of power, even metaphorically, they just have fear over the local people in order to maintain their power, even if they're not the official government, is going to be a loss for Israel and a win for Hamas. So let's try not to let this ceasefire become ceasefire I win and ceasefire you lose. Let's not give up on the hope and the plan to remove that terrorist organization from treating their own people and the Israelis so badly. Because if you need any more proof about how little they care about their people, you could see the way that they are fine to use their people as human shields and kill thousands of them to get 1,000 of their people back.